Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Bryce is Right. I am your host, Bryce Aroni, aka Bryce Cornell, and I am very pleased to be bringing you the first live version of this show. We did a recorded premiere before, but we are live now, so we will be able to take questions. And I am all about promoting secular humanism and positive atheism. That's kind of my shtick, and just talking about all the relevant issues that could sort of touch on that. Today is going to be an interesting talk. I've got a couple of great guests. Tonight's episode is White Religion in Black America. And if that sounds kind of controversial or salacious, well, that's by design. And hopefully we can clear that up. But basically the idea is to talk about why religion, and particularly Christianity, is as prevalent in the African American community as it is today, and what it's like basically to be Black and an atheist at the same time. So probably not something that many people openly talk about, but I have three guests who fortunately come from that background, and we're going to have an interesting conversation. The guests today are Mike Carey, Cynthia McDonald, and John Gray, and I will bring them on one at a time, starting with Mike. So Mike, welcome.
Hey Bryce, thanks for having me on the show. This is great. I love the intro. I love the whole feel of the atmosphere here. This is really awesome.
So we could just start with the basics. Who are you, and how exactly? I don't like mislabeling people, and I think these terms, atheist and theist, agnostic, Christian, whatever, they're all labels and they have different meanings to people. But how do you identify yourself?
I identify myself as a secular humanist, and then there's a comma, atheist, agnostic in the sense of I lack a belief in a god or gods. I don't assert that there are no gods in that sense.
Okay, and then we also have Cynthia McDonald, our second guest, who I believe identifies as an agnostic atheist.
I do, Bryce, and thank you for inviting me on to your show. I am very excited to be here. But I also would consider myself a secular humanist, an agnostic atheist, and with a caveat, a secular Buddhist. So that's kind of how I identify.
Yeah. Okay, that's going to be interesting. We may get more into that because I'm sure people will have questions about that. By the way, I love your background. I see. I think it says Black atheist, but I don't.
Yes, it says. Okay. Oh, hold on, if you can. Black atheist, a minority within a minority.
There you go. Absolutely. And our third panelist is going to be John Gray, a friend of mine. Actually, all of you are a friend of mine. I probably should have explained the reason I ended up with the panel that I did is because I actually know all three of you. We internet know each other, and we've spoken a number of times. But so you were all hand selected to be here. But John, welcome aboard.
Thanks. Appreciate that. No, I mean, we're here now, so I'm ready to go. But I know that the other panelists sort of identified as either agnostic atheist or, lacking a belief. I think I would fall along those lines as well. Also, secular humanist. And I'm excited to be here and talk about the topics.
Yeah. And it's interesting. All three of you mentioned being secular humanists, and I appreciate that as well. I think that is something that most atheists who are willing to talk about their atheism have in common, but Black, white, whatever. A lot of the online atheists that I've talked to seem to also identify with secular humanism. I don't know if you guys have noticed that as well.
For the most part, I've had my fair share of racist atheists as well, but we'll probably get into that here in a little bit.
Racism doesn't really comport with humanism very much.
Exactly.
So in preparation for tonight's discussion, I did a little research, and I saw an article on pewresearch.org that talked about the prevalence of Christianity, religion in general, but Christianity specifically in the African American community. And Black people, according to this study that was done in 2014, 8 in 10 Black people identify as Christian. The exact percentage is 79%, which is higher than the national average. And so that's really interesting to me, that it seems to be prevalent in African-American culture that Christianity is there. And so I would like to ask, I'm going to start by asking you, Mike, how did you grow up? Like, was that a thing in your household? And how are you an atheist now is the other part of that.
So short version, that was a huge thing. Everybody that I knew was some form of, every Black person that I knew was some form of Christian, mostly Baptist. I'm down here in Florida. Mm-hmm. It was pretty much to the point to where, and you might laugh, but I actually thought I was the only one that didn't believe in this, right? So my situation was more, not to make light of like a paraplegic, I'm trying to use an analogy, but maybe a paraplegic seeing somebody running and reminiscing or something like that, that feeling of, why can't I do this with the others? So, I was trying to sing the songs and clap my hands and hope the hope and do all that stuff. And I just couldn't fake it enough, I guess. And that was pretty much the extent of my religion endeavors. It's just constantly trying to keep up with everyone else in the neighborhood or my family.
So you never really believed then?
No. I have another thing that I wholeheartedly believed in. You might know about this already, but for the sake of my 5-year-old behind the door here, we'll just spell it out. Santa was a huge thing for me. I was so convinced I was going to go to the North, Pole and work there and feed the reindeer and these type of things. And, when that was destroyed, I had like a traumatic experience to where I was super depressed. And, there's no body who is writing a list of who's doing good things and who's doing bad things. And
I'm curious, if you're willing to share, how old were you when the belief was dashed and danced and pranced and
I was probably 7 or 8. Yeah. Getting up there. No, I wasn't like the 40-year-old virgin or anything with this happening, right? It was or elf or anything. But yeah, that was a huge thing for me. So I can look at it in those terms as being a relative translation, right? This must be how it feels to be disenchanted with it or to let that go to some degree. That's the best I can do to. But yeah, my situation was really, I'm the only one like this. There's nobody in the world that's like this. Why can't I be like them? Am I praying hard enough? Am I so that was kind of the upbringing, kind of being left out of certain things, or whisper talking around you and things like that. Constantly, every Christmas was another Bible, like type of thing.
Right. That is an interesting comment I'm reading on the screen right now. I'm assuming this person is as Black, about how God didn't come through for Black people. So that's an interesting perspective. Cynthia, I don't know if you've always been with the position you are now, but were you raised religious? And if so, how did you come to be an atheist?
Sure. And first off, for that comment, shout out, that's my partner. Hey, baby.
Oh, okay. Nice.
I was raised in church, but I was raised Episcopal, and which is like, pseudo little C Catholic adjacent.
Right.
And
it's a small version of Anglican, which was the divorced version of Catholic when the Church of England broke up for.
Yeah.
That's my nerd nonsense, but yes, it is similar to Catholicism, but
correct. Shout out to Henry VIII cutting off people's heads. Anyway, so I was raised. Well, he did. I was raised Episcopal, mostly because my mother's side of the family is from the Caribbean, and that was the more prevalent denomination of Christianity that was practiced. Mm-hmm. So that's how I was raised. We went to church, and it was, I think it was more so part of just a traditional thing. It wasn't as even like, like those morality, the Christian morality values were kind of, used, but it wasn't like to the point where, how like in some like more charismatic Black churches, like they in church like every day of the week, just about that one us, right? Like service was done in about an hour, maybe hour and a half. Mm-hmm. The thing that took longer was coffee hour, because everybody got to talk to everybody and catch up on everybody. And I would be at, a kid go like, come on, can we please go? So, that happened. Church was very boring. Okay. Like, it wasn't until like I got into college and I got saved that I went to a more, Black traditional church, specifically that came out of the traditional Church of God in Christ, but they, consider themselves non-denominational. And, that's when church was like more lively. We had drums, we had a choir. I even directed the choir. And, but I think that the turning point for me, because like I always was like questioned. I always had like, some like little doubts in the back of my head about, is God real? Do you, is he really there? Cause like, you had like I had like some of my times where I felt like I had experiences, right? That I thought I heard the voice of God and that God was calling me to do a work for him in a specific area, et cetera, et cetera. But, I still had doubts if that was really God or was that just really me? I didn't know. And I decided while I was, saved and, in that particular tradition, that I was going to study to become a minister. But that's when I started to delve into the Bible, and, because like we were reading the Bible, we were learning how to preach the Bible, we were learning how to get through it, like, so that we can go to any verse like that, like on a dime of the hat. So, like dropping on a dime, whatever. Anyway, we were learning the Bible. Mm-hmm. However, as we were going through the Bible, that's when, I started to read about, oh my goodness, the Bible says that.
Yeah.
And
slaves obey your masters.
Oh yeah. What's up with that? So like oftentimes, like when we had like our classes and things, I asked questions, but I didn't particularly care for my questions. And I think that the people who I was studying under knew that I had doubts, so they decided not for me to get my collar. And and then I was like, oh, well, I guess that means that I need more faith, and I need to study more, and I need to sell myself more to God, and et cetera, et cetera. But when I got to like around 30, I left the area that I lived in, and I moved back to my hometown. And even though like I was still in church, I started to like stray more. And then I kind of had this notion that Christianity just was not working for me anymore. So I started to do a lot of exploring. And I looked into other spiritual practices, a little bit of ancestral worship, Buddhism, and which actually led me to atheism. But I did the whole like, chakra thing and get my crystals and let me charge them in the sun or in the moon or whatever, and all that great stuff. But actually when I chose to become Buddhist, and I started to study Buddhist traditions and Buddhist teachings rather, and philosophies. Thank you. That's when one of the quotes that that always stuck out to me, specifically from the tradition of Buddhism that I belong to, which is Nichiren Buddhism, is from the president of the SGI, whose name is Daisaku Ikeda. And he wrote in one of his books, The Human Revolution, Volume 1, when he was giving guidance to others, he said, above all, Buddhism is good reason. And as time went on, and because I still believed in God, I still came back to this whole notion, do I have a good reason to believe in God? And I think that one of the people that actually kind of like jolted me to really start to, pontificate on that was my partner, the one who just put up the quote. He was actually the first Black atheist that I ever met in my life. And I thought that he was an enigma. I was like, whoa, you're a Black and an atheist? How does that happen? Right. Yep. And so, and that actually challenged me and challenged my my beliefs. And I remember specifically, and I call this the day that God died. I was going through a very hard time in my life. And I sat in my bedroom and I was going to chant. That's our meditative practice that we utilize in order to kind of focus us. And I'm pretty sure you all heard of Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Shout out to Tina Turner. Anyway, so as
those of us who are old enough to remember, I think John is a little bit younger,
right?
But we'll get there in a second.
Yeah. I know I just totally gave away, that I'm old, but it's okay. I'm here. So as I was, sitting in front of this this particular, thank you. But as I was sitting about to chant in front of this this object that we call the Gohonzon, I tried to chant, but I couldn't. I just started to cry. And when I was crying, is when I realized that I was responsible for my own life. Like there was nothing to catch me. And that meant that if there was nothing to catch me, there was no God to catch me, no Jesus to catch me, no Holy Spirit to catch me. Not even the ancestors could catch me because they have moved on. The only thing I have is their wisdom and teachings that have been passed down to me through generation and generation to generation. So I'm on my own. And that was scary. And but after I had my crying fit and I came to, and I was like, wait a minute, hold on. Well, if there was nothing to catch me previously and I'm here, then I should be okay now. I just had that realization that,
exactly.
That the responsibility is for my life, and I accept that. And obviously I have a certain skill set to survive. So, and that's when I call that day. That is the day that God died. And
that sounds like a good title for a book if you haven't written one yet. And you may have to check on that because it almost seems like it would be taken at this point. But
right. Don't
definitely save that.
And right, I'm gonna have the copyright that the day that God died. But that's the day that I took on the moniker of atheist.
Okay, so let me bring John in here, and actually that note you saw a little while ago, I believe that was from Pasta Mike, who's one of the guys who really kind of set me up with this show along with Oz. These guys are great, and they are watching and appreciative. I think Oz gave us a shout out a little while ago. So this is entertaining, and I'm already entertained myself. But let me get my act together. John Gray, you identified as an agnostic atheist. Mike never really believed. Cynthia did. Did you have a turning point? And if so, what was it?
Yeah, so I probably fall somewhere in the middle of those two. So I think there was a time when I genuinely thought that I had a relationship with God. However, I think I was so young that I don't know that I could ever verbalize or express what a real connection with another human being was at that time. I think you'll see in a lot of, religious like children, a lot of that indoctrination, you see like they're so happy to have their child have a relationship, but like, is that really a relationship? So I think that's sort of where I was. The reason I think I sort of had my turning point is ironically because of my mother, who is Christian. As my earliest memory with her, of her giving me advice, was telling me that I should always make up my own mind on anything anyone tells me, even her. And she told me this when I was maybe 5 or 6. and for some reason that just has always stuck with me. I know it's a weird thing to tell a 5 or 6 year old, right?
Yeah, that's a scary thing for a parent.
But that's just always been the relationship that I've had with my mother. It's just, she's always been very honest with me, and that's just always how we've talked to each other. So it was, as I started to grow up and we started to go to church more often, it was hard for me to sort of reconcile this idea that I was supposed to make up my own mind. However, when it came to religion, sorry, you might hear dogs in the background, of course, but that I'm supposed to essentially follow this tradition, this way of life, without any question. And then when I did have questions for, people in the church or my mother, pastor, a lot of the answers were either very wishy-washy, or it boiled down to, when you didn't know the answer, sort of chuck it up to God works in mysterious ways, and, we'll sort of hope that it works out in the end. So I think at that point, I was probably about 10 or 11 when I realized this wasn't really something that made any sense to me. And I think I had a moment where I was sitting in church, and it was a church we had been going to for about a year. I had just been baptized maybe a month or two ago.
What kind of church?
It was a Christian. I mean, I don't know the exact denomination, but so we were sitting there, and it was like a night service. We're on like hour 2 of a night service, and everyone is like really, really into the sermon, and they're singing, and everyone's up and, with the Holy Spirit, apparently. And I just remember looking around, even at my own mother, and thinking, what is going on? Like, is there something is there something, and I don't mean that in a funny way, but I just remember thinking, what is it that I'm missing? Every other time I've ever had a question about anything in my life that didn't pertain to religion, someone was able to explain to me in a reasonable way why something was happening the way it was. And I'm supposed to come into this building, and all of that just goes out the window. Right. So it's like, this is one of those moments where, I have to make a decision. Just because everyone else around me has decided that this makes sense to them, it doesn't mean that it objectively makes sense. So I think I knew that on some level around 10, 11, 12. And I don't think I had the vocabulary to sort of express that to other people until I got to, 21, 22. And I think, I met you a couple of years ago, Bryce, and I think that was sort of the point where I started becoming more comfortable with, who I was, saying it to other people, because I didn't want to, be in this scenario where I felt a certain way, and I didn't want to feel like I'd felt in that church. I didn't want to walk around and know who I was internally and not be able to say it to other people or feel comfortable about saying it. So I think I just, part of, that meeting you and meeting other people like you sort of helped with that process of just, first of all, being comfortable with who I am, and then being able to articulate that to other people. So that's sort of my, deconversion story. We got a question in the chat. What does TANG mean? TANG stands for the Atheist Network Group. That is our parent channel. We are one show on TANG. TART is kind of the flagship show, and TART Live, and there's several others. So definitely subscribe to TANG. It'll appear as TART right now, but in the future, the network will be TANG, and we are a show on TANG. So the Atheist Network Group, hopefully to be growing. And shout out to Secular Pagan Mom a few minutes ago. She just sent a super sticker. So John, since we're on you, I'll ask you this question, and then I'll go to Mike with the same question. What was it like with everyone around you being religious, and because you basically deconverted at kind of a young age? You said, I think sure. 10 is when, or 12 when you first realized, but it never really took. So everyone around you is believing. I'm guessing you were basically like, you kind of made it known that you were sort of like in the closet about not believing until a couple of sure.
years ago, but they know now, I assume.
Yeah. So I had a moment, with my mother, and this is probably, probably like 8-9 years ago now. And we had we sat down, and there was I think I started to make jokes about it, as we would have like family get-togethers or dinners, stuff like that. And eventually she just came up to me and, asked like, in the middle of one of my sort of smart retorts, she said, what is that supposed to mean? What are you saying? You tell me you don't believe, and told her just straight up, this is probably the best time. No, I don't. And I don't really understand why you do either. So we just had it out in that moment. And I think after I got past being able to say it to my mother, it was really easy to say it to everybody else. So yeah, it was tough, I think, in the beginning, just because there's a certain loneliness associated with feeling like you see something that other people don't. I don't want to compare it to being like a theist in a world of atheists, because it's a little different than that. But I feel like
I don't think there's such a thing.
I don't think so either. Right. So,
yeah.
But if you can imagine being in a place where, the logical answer or the logical path to where I am, my reasoning seems pretty straight to me. And instead of taking that path, I feel like everyone would prefer to either zigzag or go off the road. Like they prefer to off road. So you're just on the path by yourself. Like that, this is the shortest way to the most truth, but it doesn't seem like anyone else sort of cares about the truth. So I think in those years, I spent a lot of time just figuring out, why I cared so much about, having the right answer. And it was because I cared about, believing in as many true things as possible. So once I settled there, it was a lot easier for me to have the conversations with everyone else. And, I think it's just lonely in the beginning. That's really what it boils down to.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Mike, how about you? Because you started off basically not really taking to any of this, and so but the people around you guys, or in your peripheral life, were still believers. So, how was that experience?
One word: traumatic. Everybody who I knew, who knew other people, the whole community was religious, right? Mm-hmm. So there were, rumors and gossip that, I'm Satan, or I've been bewitched, or I'm these types of things, and just kind of the judgment before even having a conversation with me, or not wanting to hang out, or if I were to say, hey, what are you guys doing like this weekend, something like that, everybody's busy, stuff like that. So like growing up, my mom's passed away now, but my mom and my dad, they were very into it, right? And being a Black family, right, or me, I'm multiracial. My parents were from Jamaica, and they were raised a specific way as far as discipline and things, right? So if I were to, I don't know, make a mess or do something wrong, there would be a segment of spanking, right? Whether that's a buckle or just the belt, right? Coupled with now you're going to read this part in Genesis. And when we come back,
they started you from the beginning.
Yeah. And we're going to come back in the room within an hour long and point to, this section. And we want you to tell us the point of whatever it was that you read. And if I can't articulate the point, or if I can't say that I understand it, there might be, an additional segment of spanking, right? So, and I don't say that to say, oh, that's why he doesn't believe because his parents beat him and stuff like this. I was very much trying to believe it, and I got to a point where, reading this stuff and I'm saying, hey, this doesn't really seem like it's a good club for, women, for example. I look at my mom, and then I look at what how women are, discussed in the Bible, and I have a disconnect where I say, I don't look at my mom that way. I feel like maybe this is messed up, and I would try to bring up those specific verses or passages, and then at the time there wasn't really internet, right? When I was growing up, like there wasn't internet, or I couldn't go to the library and say, I want to look up these other religions. My family would be the ones taking me, right? So it was kind of, I was isolated. I was on isolation island, party of one kind of a thing. And, a lot of yelling at the top of lungs and, ending with spankings and things like this, and just kind of trying to conform and just trying to, because, isn't that, it's smart, right? It's, if you know they're gonna respond in this way, why not just go along with it to keep yourself safe or whatever it is? Yeah. And that was my thinking for the longest. What can I do? This is where I live. We call police sometimes and they'll come by, but I mean, we're talking early 2000s and things like this, right? So everything kind of fell to the wayside, and I didn't really have outlets, like I said, to the internet is great, to have community and stuff like this. I mean, even just 10 minutes having a group like this back then would have been great. So yeah, my little secret, I guess, as kind of what John was saying, a little bit piggybacking what he was saying, my little secret was, I don't really get this shit. I don't fucking believe this shit. But I need to. And, you go through your history class, right? You're getting older, you're going through your history classes, and you start getting more information about your ancestry and things like that. And you start thinking, putting two and two together and saying, wow, that's a good reason to have a disconnect. And then I start asking questions. Why is it that pretty much every Black person that I know subscribes to this?
Yeah, and we're going to get into that a little bit more in the next segment. I just want to ask really quick, though, how is it for you now? Do you still, is it like, okay, like not a big deal that you're an atheist, or do you find you get like resistance from people in your family or people how big of a deal is it?
Had you asked me that 2 years ago, it would have been much of the same, very much distant with everyone, cousins and cousins and cousins, everything. But, 2019, I would say, I have some cousins that kind of reached out, extended olive branch, straight up just telling me, we don't really care. You're a good dude as far as we can tell. We want to, make up for lost time and things like this. We only went along with what the other family was saying. And I even had an aunt who I loved very, very much. And she was part of the reason I wanted to join the club, so to speak. And she actually came out, I'm not going to say her name on here, but she actually came out and told me that she actually doesn't believe, and she hasn't believed for a long time. But she wasn't about to step in front of the bus, kind of a thing.
I suspect that there are many people who grew up like you, and who you were the one who are now just verbalizing it, and but Cynthia, you were a believer for longer than Mike or John, and not only that, but you actually was trying to get into the ministry, and so I'm wondering what that looks like now to people who may be related to you or other people in the African American community who you associate with.
So I think that one of the things that was one of my saving graces is that I became atheist as an older person. I believe that if I were, even though I had my doubts, I mostly kept them to myself, or I would just explain them away by saying that I lack faith and I need to try harder, especially when I got into the whole I'm saved now position. So when and I think that also specifically with my family, it was not as much of a shock because I became Buddhist first, and when I became Buddhist, like that's when all the questions started. Well, why are you chanting? Why are you Buddhist? Why are you not this anymore? Blah blah blah. And to be frank with you, when I got saved is actually when my parents were concerned. And the reason why, and it was really interesting that they were, because they were concerned that the 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 church itself, and especially like the pastor and the other ministers had too much of a control on the congregation, and that I could be in a pseudo cult. And they were actually not that far off. Even though, like, I swore up and down, no, I'm not in a cult, this, that, and the third. But at
That's
the
what every
same,
cult person says.
exactly,
No one who's in a cult says that they're in a cult.
exactly. But hindsight,
Mhm.
I believe I actually was, and the reason being is because I believe this is one of the things that actually made me really disenchanted with the church, was and especially in that in that particular denomination, or non-denomination as they call themselves, is that I felt like the pastor just had way too much power over the people. And because it was kind of like, I'll preface it with a tiny story. So while I was studying being minister, I was also had like a church leadership position, and a lot of it was because like I was a minister of music. So the church at the time, and this is like when the internet was starting to be,
A thing.
a thing, yes.
Yeah.
Like people was like really getting into the internet. So like the church decided to go ahead and create a website. They had like a standing one, but they actually hired, or worked with people who was in this realm. Anyway,
Mhm.
and I believe that one of the people who was working on it was the pastor's daughter at the time. That's what I want to say, but I could be wrong. Anyway, so the pastor sent a link to different people that and asked them what was their feedback. And so one of the members who happened to be in leadership was a little bit more critical. Like some people's like, oh, it's great, it's wonderful, it's excellent, it's awesome, go pastor. And then this one person was like, well, and this is a person who actually had a bit more expertise in this field. And he said, well, you could tweak this better. This happened. This particular graphic is a bit too much. You may want to like fix the word. Happy birthday, Theo.
Happy birthday, Theo.
And you may want to fix some wording when it comes to your mission. Like general critiques that I would think that any person would give in order because they care about the church, and they want the church's marketing area to be the best as it can be from their standpoint that they saw.
Mhm.
So instead of like the pastor being like, thank you for your feedback, we're gonna take these into consideration and see that what we can actually fix or change, he accosted the man. He accosted them in front of the leadership. Like, when I asked for feedback, because he was basically saying, when I asked for feedback, thank you, I will take my slice. I like strawberries. I was not asking for criticism per se. I was
Mhm.
asking for you just to basically say, amen, this is great.
Agreement.
Yeah, it's kind of just like the shut up and dribble type thing. Like,
So you embarrassed, or well, the preacher was embarrassed,
Right.
and so instead of being humble and demonstrating humility, it sounds like you demonstrated the opposite of that, which
Right.
made you feel some type of way.
Yeah, right. Even though I can't stand that phrase, but it did make me feel some
Let
type
me
of way.
apologize.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. No,
Let me
I mean,
apologize for code switching just there, because I think I just did that. I wouldn't say that on a live stream. So
no, you're good. You're good. But
all right.
no, that's kind of how I took it. So it was just different instances like that actually showed that the pastor just had, like I said, way too much control. So I'm just like, So who are we worshiping, God or the pastor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I never, and I always cleave to that whole, not a respecter of persons. God is not a respecter of persons, because I felt that, and I cleave to the whole, there's neither Jew nor Greek, male nor female, bond nor free. We are all one in Jesus Christ. Like, because I believe in equality, and I still do. So when I seen these particular events popping up, like in leadership, I was like, whoa, what is this, right? So that just really just caused like a lot of disenchantment rather in me. And
so when others saw this, when others recognized that about you, did they start treating you differently, or were you open about it?
Yeah, they were, because like because I wasn't really like in lockstep, completely with the leadership. And so since I wasn't in complete lockstep with the leadership, and even though like I kind of kept like some of my my oughts to myself, I still I can't hide nothing. I don't play poker with me. I would give away everything, and
How about nowadays? Do you feel like you're separated, or I don't want to use ostracized, that's a strong word, but do you feel like you're a little bit disconnected from the African American community because of your atheism?
Well, I mean, like that's why I was saying that it's a bit different for me, because I'm older. I like, because like part of the things that I do is, political, and I'm involved myself in, social justice work as well. And a lot of people that I work with are Christians. And so I kind of like, put my atheist hat down for a little bit in order for us to get work done, but all of them know I'm atheist. I don't hide that from anybody, and I don't get treated differently just because I am. And I think that one of the reasons being is because I'm very much so unapologetically me. Now, I will say that I do get the occasion of proselytization from some other people who may, if it does come up in conversation, by the by, I do. I've been Bible beat, not in the recent times since my atheism, and I had to shut that shit down. I was just like, look, like, one of the things you're not going to do, and I think that the only way that I shut it down is that I said, look, you cannot prove God exists. No one can. And then they were like, yes, I can. I said, no, you cannot. No one can prove God exists. And they said, well, then prove God doesn't exist. I said, I can't. That's why I'm agnostic atheist. I don't have that. But then again, like, I don't say out of my mouth, God does not exist. I said, I just lack a belief in God. There's a difference, right? Because there is a lack of empirical evidence to support an existence of a God or gods. And I rushed on that laurel. So, so oftentimes, like, when I get the pushback, I'm like, look, you can't do it, so shut up.
Well, let me ask you, John, because I'm curious about this, and this may be the more controversial element of the question, but the three of you, really four of us, if I include myself, have indicated that, look, we know the prevalence of Christianity in the Black community. Why is it in 2021, as of the time of this video, why is this still such a thing? Why is it still so prevalent? Why are there more Black people who are Christian than white people even? Because I guess the question I'm asking is, was this religion given to Black people, to Black Americans, by white people? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so to go sort of work backwards.
Before you answer that, not to cut you off, do me a favor, put that last comment back on the screen, because that was a $20 from David Smalley.
Can I say this really quick?
Sure.
David Smalley, I am such a big fan of yours. I'm really fangirling right now. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just, as a white atheist with several religious Black family members, we discussed church's role in their culture and freedom. So how can white atheists offer respectful challenges to Black Christians without offending Black culture?
Oh, that you
yeah. So I think the answer is almost the same as the one I was going to give to the last question you asked. So, to that point, Black culture is almost synonymous sometimes with the religion that it takes on. So, I think you first have to be able to connect with Black people who reside on the same side of the religious argument that you do. It's very similar to arguments about racism in America. I think you have to find common ground with people who look the same as the people that you might have a disagreement with, because at least they can carry your message a little bit easier than you can, without making it feel like you're the white guy who has all the answers, sort of. At least that would be my advice. So the point of like, why is it still so prevalent, and is this something that was sort of passed on to Black people? Yeah, I think so. But the other part of Black culture that made this such a stronghold is this element of tradition and respect for elders. It creates this environment in which questioning things is very much frowned upon. To Cynthia's story earlier about just providing feedback, even something as simple as just trying to make each other better, that has a hard time passing through because it's seen as a challenge to authority. And to the point that Mike was making earlier about was he ostracized? It felt like lonely. I think part of the reason I had a lot easier of a time when I was younger is because the emotional dependence, I think, that a lot of Black people grow up with around this community that they surround themselves with, I didn't necessarily have. I've always been someone who's a little bit more comfortable on my own. So if I was to be challenged by my Black community and they said to me, well, like, either, you're not Black enough, you don't get it, I'm okay with, you not getting it. And that's all right. Like, I can be the guy in the corner that you guys talk about at the cookout. All right, cool. Like, I'm all right with that. But I think a lot of people aren't, because I have a lot of the few Black friends that I do have in real life, I think are closer to the agnostic side than they are to any religion they've ever been exposed to. The problem, though, that they find in their own lives is that the people around them who they've grown up with are so religious that to say that out loud is to really ruffle feathers.
They're probably not open about it.
Exactly. Yeah, they aren't. But that's something that you only talk about with other people that you feel comfortable with, that won't, sort of turn their, their eyebrow up at you. So I think that's a big reason why it's so prevalent now, and that I think there's a lot of people who logically, a lot of Black people who have gotten to the point where we are, just from the reasoning it through, but they literally can't even say it. And I think there would be a lot more of them if we were able to talk about it without feeling like I feel like sometimes we're made to believe that by challenging the authority figure, we are the degradation of the Black community because we disagree. And I think there's somewhere along the line, we've conflated trying to make each other better by having a difference of opinion with challenging authority and therefore breaking down morality and everything else that we hold dear. Sometimes tradition is meant to be broken down because it wasn't a good tradition to begin with. Mm-hmm. And I think we have to be able to be willing to admit that to ourselves.
And there's something to be said when you talk about tradition, yes, it is traditional in the African-American community, but when we look back through our history and we see all of the great civil rights leaders, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and you see even the civil rights leaders of today, you got, Reverend Al Sharpton, and everyone was Reverend this and Pastor that and Preacher this. And they were doing good things for the African-American community in other ways. And so have we conflated like the good things that they've done with this idea that this is God and this is God's work. And that's why so many people are holding on so dear to it, that, it's not just these brilliant men who wanted to fight hard to make change, but it was God who was doing it. And you're turning your back on God. Well,
I want to hear what you guys also think about this, but I wanted to just respond, Bryce, to that. I think a lot of times we don't logically assess the fact that their thoughts, those beliefs of those reverends, those priests, all those people, they were true whether they were reverends or priests or not. Like those things hold true regardless of the ideology, of that person on a God and whether they exist and whether there's a heaven or a hell. Those were true things because if you follow them to their logical conclusions, they're true. So I think to your point, we've just meshed them together and said, because we want to emulate the person who's had the idea, right? We say, because this person had the idea, it's best to follow in their footsteps. And part of that must be to adopt everything that they've adopted. And sometimes that's just not the case.
Mike, you can carry on to the last part of that question, but I guess I want to elaborate a little and try to figure out where. Well, I guess we all know where it came from. For America, if you live in the United States and you are of African American descent, you kind of your ancestors were given the Bible. They were allowed to have church. I think it was the one thing that they were allowed to have as a community. Mm-hmm. So it seems to make sense that this is something that the master wanted Black people to believe in. What are your thoughts about that? And particularly, I want to look a little bit at the Bible and the verses that talk about slavery. They just seem very convenient to keep Black people being slaves, and that was my perspective when I got to the verses about slavery. But I don't know, Mike. What do you think about that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things to touch on. So let's do it in the order received, right? So, right. It's kind of a hand-me-down religion, right, for Black people in America. It's, to me, surprising that, yes, if this is your time away from picking cotton in the fields and being whipped or whatever, and you're allowed to sit down for a minute and sing a song and maybe get a little bit of water, why wouldn't you go do that, right? Everybody and their mom's going to go to this gathering to go sit down, even if you don't believe it. You go enough times, eventually you'll just conform and be a part of the group. But it's surprising to me that even, 6 generations after that, or even, let's fast forward and go even after, civil rights and things of this nature, this is still, as John was saying, right, there's this tradition, but it's not really that safe haven as it was from the environment that you were leaving, right, in the field, right? It's not really in that aspect. It becomes more of a and this is going to sound a little bit harsh, but it to me looks like more of a social massaging, right? This is our escape from society at large, right, where we can talk about Black issues in and of itself. It so happens to keep the name of a church, and maybe there will be some preaching going on at some point. So I think that's kind of why it was kind of delivered to the Black people and then kind of nurtured in that way over time, was because it became a safe space for anything under the sun, really. As far as the slavery aspect of it, I mean, if you ask any Black Christian of any denomination, how do you feel about this aspect of it? Specifically, we can go to Exodus 21, right? That's going to be the biggie, right?
There's Leviticus 25.
Yeah. I mean, if you bring up even like a verse like that, and you say, how do you feel about the loophole of them, bringing you in, marrying you off to, one of the female slaves, and then you have a child, and then when you're supposed to go free, they keep the child and the woman. And then, of course, you're going to be depressed, and then the piercing the ear with all of that. How do you feel about that? Don't you think that is a little bit nefarious in the sense of keeping you as property and passing you down and things of this nature? And how do you feel about that? I mean, the average response that I get from a Black person, man or woman, is that was just something of the time, or they don't really apply that to the now and their day to day. They're very much cherry picking, and but I don't knock them for cherry picking, because obviously if you're skipping over,
it's the same answer that you tend to get from white Christians who believe it. I tend to get that answer from any Christian, regardless of what color they are, if they believe in the Bible, that seems to be the answer that they go to. That, well, that's just how it was at the time. God was just regulating slavery. He made rules to make it better. It wasn't slavery. It was the nice, happy, friendly kind of slavery.
Nice, happy, friendly slavery. Right. This is whips and tassels.
Thank you, David.
No, but
yeah, he's David is the man. Like, when are you coming on the show, David? You got a free invitation to this show. We appreciate that.
Dave is the man. Dave is the man right now.
Dave is the man.
But I just wanted to add really quick. Imagine, all right, you have that whole aspect of slavery right there in your face, and they're kind of, for lack of a better term, whitewashing it to, be kind of this watered down version of, what it is in today, right? But imagine if at some point some Black person who was religious had stepped away and decided we're going to create, I don't know how to give this example cleanly. What about like something like an NAACP, YMCA / let's hang out social place, right? And kind of seeing the experiment play out and say how many would dwindle off and say, hey, maybe we can do everything we've been doing. We just don't have to tithe, right? I have to pay my bills, right? Or whatever it is. We don't have to, et cetera. We can just kind of taper off into, and that would have been, I think, a good progression for the Black community in and of itself. A lot of the humanistic aspects of our day-to-day, as far as that checklist is concerned, right, I feel like is impeded by the religion that they're hanging on to. And I kind of look at that and say, why wasn't that the case? Why in 2021, for example, like as you mentioned, would...
By the way, atheist cats, that's a good point as well, with the Native Americans being really having a lot of their culture destroyed, by colonialism, and many of them having to either convert to religion to Christianity. But
exactly.
Yeah.
But just to finish that point is when you look at everyone kind of clinging to that specific religion, right, and not having any attempts to deviate, right? There's no Black community 2.0, right? We're not, there's no path off of this. To me, it's just very, like I said, I'm very taken aback by that. When I look at the history and say, if you know that there was violence and you know that there was this ultimate smashing of your personality and self-worth, and this destruction of the female, and the destruction of the family, and all of these things, it's then kind of a double-edged sword, because at one point I can point at it and say, well, this, just like you guys were talking about, the role models are all really reverends and things of that nature, and maybe there's this composition fallacy where they say, okay, the goodness that they have is some aspect or manifested because of the religion. But I look at that, and it's the double-edged sword part of it is that kind of makes it harder to leave the religion knowing about your ancestry and your past, right? As you kind of said, it would kind of feel like you're a traitor to the religion, or that you're ungrateful to.
You've abandoned Martin Luther King.
Right. So it's like as you said, a tradition, but I feel like it's like a tradition on crack in a sense, where it's not as easy to let go of that type of tradition without the backlash of the community and being ostracized. I think that's the fear. As I said, or actually I didn't say yet, of all the people that I've had any input in a deconversion, I don't give myself full credit of that. Obviously, there's a lot of people they speak to over time, but of all the people that I've had any input, any conversation with, and then finding out later down the line that they've let it go, the majority of them, believe it or not, were Black people. And, each has their own reasons, but I've just noticed that it just takes that little, I don't want to say a push, but that outlet to say, okay, this is a little bit normal, or this is a little bit, easier to do because there's somebody else holding my hand, walking me through all these questions that I have. Right. And I fear that without people like us here, Cynthia, John, and Bryce and myself, even without us having the conversation and reaching across the aisle, so to speak, there's as much as the want is there, let's say, to deviate, without a lifeboat, without a community set up to be as closely matched with what they're currently experiencing, it's just not going to happen, or it's going to be that much more difficult. So they're willing to put up with the things like the slavery and all of the other things to just have some type of safety or comfort.
This is a really interesting discussion, and I feel like Cynthia has a lot more to say about this, and I feel like John probably has a couple more things to say about it. You're thinking stuff, but Cynthia definitely has some stuff to say. So at the hour mark, we're gonna go into kind of an open discussion, and you guys can talk about anything you want on this. But this is the part of the show where I like to go into open discussion, and after that, I will start with Cynthia. So stand by. You caught me on my shot. Cynthia, open discussion. What you got to say?
I kind of wanted to touch base specifically on that slavery portion concerning specifically Black Americans, and
Yep.
it's kind of interesting because I prefaced earlier that I am of lineage that my mother's Caribbean, specifically Jamaican. I believe. Hey, how you know, brother? Well, go on. Anyway,
The girl not easy. No, go ahead.
Right.
Thank you, Pastor Mike, by the way.
But also my father was from the South. And I can trace my lineage specifically to slavery in America. Now, the thing about that I really want to touch on, as far as how did Christianity survive so long, specifically in I would say in Black culture, because there's Black American culture, and then there's kind of Black culture in different areas, right? And I definitely would have to say is that slavery as a vehicle here, and also colonialism in other parts of the world, in predominantly Black countries, specifically in the continent of Africa. Now, one of the things that I really wanted to touch on was coping mechanisms. So, by trade,
Yep.
I'm a social worker. I'm specifically a medical case manager, and I talk with my clients a lot about coping through trauma. And a lot of my clients, especially the ones who, because I do have a good size of clients who happen to be transgender, and they have experienced a trauma all on its own because of how they identify. Now, and especially those who happen to be Black trans, that's just even amplified, right? Because there's definitely an issue when it comes to homophobia and transphobia in our community. And I would conjecture that a lot of that has to do with our Christian sensibilities and our Judeo-Christian values, So, but going back to this trauma piece, my partner and I were watching a documentary this past Saturday called what was it called, babe? Unchained Memories. That's what it's called, Unchained Memories. I just asked him about this today. And this particular documentary was produced by HBO in 2003 that had Library of Congress slave narratives. So basically what happened was that there was folk who in the 1930s went and interviewed ex-slaves. and they wanted to talk to them about their lived experience as slaves. And I tell you, if you all get a chance to watch this documentary, I mean, it's
what was the name of it?
Unchained Memories.
Not to be confused with Unchained Melody, which is
correct. This is not a
No,
no, it's not that.
It's in the opening,
right? No, not at all. But in this particular documentary, like it was so jarring how vivid these people's recounts of the different trauma that they have gone through. They talked about the whippings. They talked about how their family was sold to other places. They talked about, how they worked and they worked and they worked and they never got a day off, sometimes 7 days a week. Usually like the standard was you work from sun up to sundown, 6 days a week, you get Sunday off. But that was not always the case. So oftentimes what a lot of slaves did was they escaped into Christianity and Christian worship in the Bible. And even though you had like a lot of them that couldn't read, they still like cleaved to the same kind of Bible stories, including this whole notion that I'll get my freedom or my reward when I die and I meet God in heaven. Okay. So after, even when we had, emancipation that was wrought, 1863, 1865, we still dealt with lynching.
1964, 2021.
Yeah. Hello. Shout out to the 13th Amendment. Slavery is not completely gone away. But regardless of that, we still have this whole notion of like escapism to the next life. In order to deal with the trauma that has been passed on from generation to generation, even though that particular trauma just like, reinvents itself, slavery pre-1865, Jim Crow, 1865 to 1964, and then continued disenfranchisement of African Americans to this very day. And even though you do have a component of the reverend, doctor, et cetera, that, purports social justice. And a lot of them are sincere. Some of them are not, but still, they still tie it to this whole notion of God wanting freedom specifically for this group of people.
This is what God would want.
Right. This is what God wants. But then again,
then why the hell hasn't he done it yet?
That part. That part. And that's and usually that's like and that's the pushback I get. I'm like, I really wish, and I would say this to any of these, especially when it comes to these social justice preachers, I appreciate the work that you all do in your communities, but I have a huge ought with you all correlating God wanting African Americans to be free and also to have a proper positionality, specifically in this country, and it has not happened yet. If God wanted it, he would have did that shit already. Okay. So no, stop.
Well, to that point, doesn't it set up this self-fulfilling prophecy is where you win no matter what? I mean, we talked, if God does save us and bring us to the promised land, he did it. Like, hooray, God does care about us. If he doesn't, well, I guess we'll still win when we die because, we'll meet him.
Yeah. That is
like you win no matter what, and I think that's a big part of how religion survives. The promise and unfortunately it has to manifest itself in people in trauma. That's another good reason I feel like why you have a lot of jailhouse conversions. People at their absolute worst, tend to find religion the easiest. Is because when you're down and out the worst, that's the time where you need someone that can promise you the most. And even if they don't come through, who better to promise than someone that can't necessarily be held accountable for their promise until after you are gone, right?
Yeah. Or even the whole notion of if it does not come through, well, that was not his will.
There you go. Yep.
But then my question would be, then what is his will?
Yeah.
Well, the will is what the Bible says. And clearly his will is slavery, because slaves are to obey their masters, even the cruel ones.
Yep.
So says not the gospel, but so says the New Testament. This is not Old Testament stuff. This is the New Testament. Slaves, obey your masters. There's no commandment for masters to release your slaves.
Exactly.
So what am I supposed to take away from that? Clearly God is okay with slavery.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah. I mean, why hasn't God freed the slaves? Well, he likes slavery. Slavery is okay. There's nothing wrong with slavery.
Right. There was, and that's another thing. Like, there is nothing in the Bible to support, what did they call it?
Are you talking about indentured servitude?
No. There's a specific doctrine that a lot of social justice preachers like to purport, and unfortunately, the nomenclature escapes me right now. It's more like, this freedom doctrine that they often, say, and they try to oftentimes build straw man arguments with some particular misinterpreted scripture in order to support these particular notions. But in actuality, and this is another thing that I have issues with, especially with Black Christians, is that God in the Bible absolutely had picks and chooses and favorites when it came to who he was supporting and who he did not. And if you weren't considered a chosen person or a part of the chosen people, you did not get God's protection. And in actuality, if for some reason God felt that you sinned against me, you did me wrong, he turned into the jealous lover, and he turned his back on you, sometimes even like wrought his wrath upon you.
Hashtag Job life. Yeah.
Hello.
I'm a jealous God who punishes who visits the inequities of the children of the fathers onto the children to the third or fourth generation.
Right. And even that was oftentimes the scriptures that was even used in order to actually say Black people happen to be cursed, because we're still carrying the curse of Ham, or we're still carrying the curse of what's the brother Cain? We're still carrying the curse of that nature, and so so it's okay to treat us like shit, right? Because God wants it that way. So if there is like this whole notion of God coming to rescue the Black man and the Black woman and the Black person, again, I don't see, especially in his particular word, how this even happens, and that's kind of like, I'm okay with throwing the baby out with the bathwater, i.e. throw the Bible with fire.
And doesn't that mean, though, that the Christian of today really isn't a biblical Christian? They've created this version of God that doesn't even purport even a little bit to the version that is supposed to be coming straight from God. And if that's true, then what we're really saying is the Black community has created their own God out of the trauma of being Black in America. It has nothing to do really with the fact that it was passed down. It might have started that way, but the God that we're holding on to is not the God that was given to us. It's the one that we hope to meet one day, but that isn't the one of the Bible.
It's the augmented version.
Yeah.
And somebody put a comment here that I don't know if they're theist or atheist or et cetera, but they were referencing a verse in the Bible where, they're telling the slave masters to be nice to the slaves or to love their slaves. So before I even touch on the verse, how would a master go about loving the slave? Wouldn't the best thing you could do for the slave be to free them?
To not be their master.
I don't know. Just kind of. So I just want to say that. But the other thing was, I think the verse we're talking about, I pulled it up here. I wasn't sure if this was the one, but Ephesians 6:8. It says, because you know that the Lord will reward each one for whatever good he does, whether he is slave or free. And then 9 goes into, and masters, do the same for your slaves. Give up your use of threats, because you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So it's kind of double speak a little bit. It's like
it's also kind of a completely impotent defense, because that doesn't explain away you're allowed to beat them as long as they don't die within 2 or 3 days.
Well, it's a parallel, right?
Yeah.
It's a parallel to parallel to God's relationship with everyone else. That's exactly what it is. It's justifying God through, or justifying the slave master through the way God supposedly is, supposed to be able to treat his creation as humans. So if you give God dominion over them, then you can easily get to them having dominion over slaves. And that's exactly what it is. It's just this sort of rationalization, this round circle where we just say, well, we understand that we're just treating people badly, but we're gonna just mentally allow the loophole that if we call you the master, you're allowed to do that. But somehow love we don't need to worry about the whole master thing if we just say, yeah, we love you. Like, no reasonable person would ever allow that logic in any relationship that they have with another person. Only here does that happen.
That reminds me of domestic violence. I'm sorry. I mean, which is so like a lot of my clients that I work with. I mean, like that sounds like interpartner violence. How a partner would treat another who will beat the shit out of them or treat them like whatever, and then come back to say, "But baby, I love you." Like why? And to be honest with you, if you actually even look at the Bible, and yes, David, that's exactly what I was thinking about liberation theology, which is absolute bullshit when it comes to us, right? So and again, yeah, you're right, John. It's like this double entendre about exactly what we're meaning by this particular relationship. Because and the thing about it is that God has shown throughout the Bible that he can change that relationship depending on how he feels at that particular given moment in time. If he feels jilted, it's your ass, right?
Yep.
If he feels like he wants to accept you, oh, thank you so much,
just like every other sociopathic abuser. Yeah.
Yes, and that's exactly what this particular God, especially when it comes to the God of Christianity, is. Yeah. That's what it is. And yes, he is a gaslighter. So there you go.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Mike. I didn't.
No. I was just going to say, I'm kind of OCD if you can't tell. If you change the terminology, right? You took out the word slave and trigger alert, I guess, for your audience. I just want to say this. If you were to change the word slavery, right, or slave to rape victim, right, or rapee, however you want to say it, the moniker, it's even easier to look at how ridiculous the statement is. If the statement were to say, hey, rapists, love your rape victim, you can. It really exposes how asinine that comment is, and especially if there's a whole section explaining how you're supposed to treat your rape victims, and then you fast forward right through the history.
Well, actually, there is.
Well,
I mean,
I mean, in the same.
If you rape a virgin, but then you are to pay the father 30 shekels or whatever it was. And then you marry her. Sorry.
No.
Yes, you're spot on. But what I mean is, in the fashion of breaking it down to, what the rapee is worth and how long you can keep them and you can pass them along and all those types of things, right? It just sounds even more and more gross. And then when you fast forward to something like 2021 and you say, well, how can all these people be part of this club where, you're basically going to be raped, or you're acknowledging that there a lot of rape was going on and this is how they treat people, and right, how can you be a part of this, right? And to touch on what Cynthia was saying and kind of what John was saying as well is, it's kind of like a maybe even like a Stockholm syndrome, to where you can't really be upset with the causer of this. You found this deep insight to why they're doing this to you, and it's all going to be brought out after the fact, after the rape is done. There will be some prize or some explanation that'll make it all worthwhile,
or after you're dead.
Right.
If you could just survive the abuse enough, then you can get to the light at the end of the tunnel.
Right, and then your reward is in heaven.
Yeah.
Right, but then it's not a rape. It's not a rape anymore. Right now, it's consensual. Right. So if the slave is happy to be one, then it's a consensual agreement at that point, right? It's now the slave is viewing themselves as, this is a job and I'm lucky to have it. And, why, it just becomes so far removed from viewing the issue and looking at it as a normal aspect of their day-to-day life.
I got a question for all of you. Is it scary to have this conversation? And I guess you're going to be speculating here because we're all atheists. But if you are a Black Christian or even someone who is struggling with your faith, is it scary to look in the Bible to like read about these things or to ask questions about it? Is it just the fear of finding something that may upset your worldview that you've grown up with, that your whole life everybody is in, that prevents people from asking questions like this? I mean, to themselves. I'm not even talking about to other people, but I, like you guys, it took me actually reading the Bible to realize that this shit's fucked up. If you'll pardon my French, there's no way around you're allowed to beat them as long as they don't die because they're your property. There's no way around you can pass them off to your children as an inheritance. And so, but I never learn that. I came out of it way later. I was 38 years old by the time I deconverted. I was a Christian apologist online for a number of years. Believing, but I never read those, and I never once you guys who were atheists put me in the position of having to explain this in such a way. How could I be a Black person and explain away slavery, Christian apologist? And so I had to read the Bible, figure out what I was talking about, figure out the answer, and it's not in there. And I can't ask other people for the answer because their answers are all bullshit. So
I think
that took me out of it, but what's stopping everyone else from reading it?
I think for the Black person that's honest with themselves, it probably is really scary. And I think that probably prevents them from taking a step. I think for the person who hasn't gotten to the point of being honest with themselves when they're not talking to someone else, I think they've already sort of accepted this mantra of, no matter who I talk to, God has an answer. So, and I can just always come back to that. So for that, I'm not talking about that person, but for the Black person who's really like in the middle or they're wavering even a little bit. Right. I think it's especially scary for them because not only is it, if this isn't true, sort of, how do I take control of my own life? That's which everyone goes through. Right. But specifically to Cynthia's point about the trauma, it's like I've lost the coping mechanism, one, and the hope that this will get better, two. It's kind of like, my best parallel that I could think of is like talking to someone who might have survived the Holocaust, who was Jewish. Like you would really like to believe that Hitler went to a terrible, terrible place after that all was over. But what if he didn't? Like
I don't understand, John, how you can believe that. And if Hitler converted to Christianity before he killed himself, if he confessed his sin, then he goes to heaven, and Anne Frank, the Jew who he tortured, goes to hell.
Right. So to that point, and I think you and I are on the same page.
And you believe suicide's a mortal sin.
Well, I think Bryce and I we're on the same page on the logical consequences of how that would work, obviously. But I think to the point I was making earlier about the people who are Black Christians today, that's not the God that they believe in. They have formed their own God who is more just than the God of the Bible. So in their mind, I think that there will be some atonement for, those deeds, even if the word of God says otherwise. And
it's like reparations, like a spiritual reparations for like God will fix or go after whoever caused the slavery because they misinterpreted or misunderstood.
Exactly. And I think that when you remove that, like if you follow everything to its logical conclusion and you have to leave that behind, then there's, even if it was a fictional one to begin with, right? Which you and I agree with, because it doesn't purport to the biblical version of God. Even if that was fictional to begin with, it was still something they were holding on to. So, I think some people are hesitant to leave that. And I think my mother might be one of those people. To leave that is to lose a lot of hope in what could be. And when you grow up feeling like there should be this ultimate atonement, it's hard to leave that.
Let me respond really quickly to the last comment. Someone talked about Hitler being a Christian, and there is historical debate on the authenticity of his Christianity, and so I tend not to go there because Hitler was a Christian in the same way that Donald Trump is a Christian. That the Bible is his favorite book, and he holds it upside down, to take photo of. So, I could see people saying, "Well, that's a he wasn't a true Christian." So just going to the no true Christian.
But to the point that we're making for the purpose of for the purposes of this discussion, he was Christian, because if we're going by the biblical definition of you could be non-Christian acting all your life. As long as at the end you get there, it doesn't really matter. So it's not a works thing.
And it's actually just more so like, and I would even, and going back to even what you talked about, the Pew Research, about 79% of Black people identifying as Christian. So like this is an overwhelming portion of, the African-American community that identifies like that. A lot of them, and especially, from personal experience, would oftentimes not demonstrate, like, as John, you mentioned Christian behavior, whatever the fuck that is. And, but Lord forgive me, I remember when studying to be a minister, and we used to joke about this, like in class, that notice the same sisters and brothers is coming to the altar every week because they need to get delivered from something. So their whole thing was like, right. I mean, like they Christian shaming.
That was
like
a good weekend.
Right.
I used to.
I have to get a cleansing.
Right. Exactly.
That was just a bath.
Doesn't relate.
It's a spiritual bath every week.
Some avocado
every week. Right.
This doesn't relate specifically to what you were saying, but I used to, in my youth, my first job, or one of my first jobs, I worked in a video store. Not to date myself, but back when that was a thing.
Wow.
Worked in a video store. But it wasn't a Blockbuster. It was like a mom and pop video store.
Okay.
And we had we had an adult section with the X-rated movies.
With the curtain?
But it had a sliding door. But
okay, I just dated myself, but okay, go ahead.
Yeah. But we also had to have cameras in there just to make sure that, because it was a separated room. So when I was working in this store, especially if I was on shift on my own, I could see anyone who was walking in there. There was this church preacher who frequented, I can't remember, I wouldn't say his name even if I remembered it, but he was at a local church. He was a preacher. He went in there often. Sometimes he would come out with a videotape, a VHS tape to buy. And sometimes he'd go in there and then leave. And it was clear he was struggling, but he was in there often enough that he was a regular, and then he was in church every Sunday. And so this is not to straw man all, preachers, but at the end of the day, as long as you are repenting your sins or confessing your sins or doing something to your sins, whichever version of Christianity you believe in, you can do that. And then you can judge other people for doing it, like they're the scum of the earth.
So I have a question to all of you for that, and I'm going to try to relate it back to the topic of just being, a Black person who could be Christian and struggling with this.
We'll wrap it up after this question.
Sure.
Okay.
So that process of like knowing that you should be walking a life of Christ, quote unquote. But even if you mess up, you can repent, right? It's sort of like a safety net, right? Like I know that even when I mess up, there's the consequences aren't dire, because if I'm genuinely repenting, I'll get there in the end. Mm-hmm. I feel like as a Black person looking at that, even if we all believed slavery was immoral and maybe someone got it wrong and God didn't actually believe it, the idea of being able to just wipe away a mistake. And, this idea, it doesn't follow to me the atonement idea of like having to, come to terms with everything you've done.
I'm laughing at Atheist.
No, 100%. So like how is there a reason that you think that Black people may have a hard time seeing that that's another mechanism by which they can be either repressed or just beaten down? Because I feel like it also gives license to people to treat them badly too, because we all can just escape, how we treat each other if we all just believe in the same God and we get to the same place at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See, what you're talking about is probably going to be viewed as a kind of a gotcha, as much sense as it makes. And of course, I agree with you. I mean, that's something I would probably go to as well, is if these are the rules that you're playing by, then ultimately anybody that's, doing any wrong that you would perceive is on some infinite can't fuck up status, right? And I look at that like nobody wants to admit that they've been got, right? Nobody wants to admit that, I mean, if you ask, if you were to say, are there such things as stupid people, right? That question sounds like some people might be in the audience might say, yeah, of course there's stupid people. Then it's like, okay, well, find me a stupid person and let's ask that person if they think that they're stupid, right? And now it just gets into a subjective thing, right? And the reason I bring that up is based on what you were saying. Why would somebody realize there's this loophole?
Sure.
And kind of just bat their eyes at it and not really pay any attention to it? It's because it probably does make them feel a little bit inadequate as far as their critical thinking skills, and because they weren't the ones to highlight it or bring it up, instead someone else is bringing it to them. It probably becomes a very defensive thing. So they might agree with you if you point it out and say, hey, this is a little silly. They might agree with you, but they're not going to be willing to just let you know that. They'll probably go in the shower and cry about it, or something. but I think that's really what it comes down to, is the oops factor of you didn't know something or you didn't realize something and you feel a little bit strange and silly or dumb. But really, any mistake that you make, you really should be, sure, down for a minute or two and then excited that you're smarter or that you learned something and you just move on from there. So I think that's why all those conversations kind of, you're dead in the water from the get-go, because if you point out any fallacy or any issue, it's kind of like, damn, dude, I'm going to disagree with you until I'm blue in the face. And then when you leave, I'm going to have to process this on my own, because it kind of feels like I told you so if I agree with you.
Guys, this was go ahead, Cynthia.
I just wanted to touch on that. I think that another thing that you guys should also consider, especially if you bring this particular point up, John and Mike, as you echoed, is that a lot of times the escape hatch is that we are of a sinful nature and that we needed Jesus's blood in order to save us from ourselves. Even though he sacrificed himself so that we can, but that's a whole nother, so, and also let's even think about like one of the favorite church songs that happens to, play during altar call is "We Fall Down, But We Get Up," so often, and even in that particular case, there's this whole thing about, well, it's the struggle that makes you stronger in order for you to see Jesus someday. And one day you're going to get it right. So that's why we need the blood, because et cetera, right?
So cringy.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, and to me, like, I feel like it's just a circular argument, right? And like, after a while, it's kind of like, even if you're pointing out, as you all said before, like the fallaciousness of their argument, or even their beliefs, or even actually happen to purport those particular ideologies, they're still going to fall back on the same rhetoric, same doctrine, same dogma that has been kind of beat into them since they actually came, since they actually said, this is what I'm going to believe, and I think that that's something that we have to be aware of, especially when we're having these conversations with theists, specifically Christians, because of course, majority, overwhelming portion of Black people in America identify as Christian.
And that 79% was that was just 79%. There's a whole another percent that identifies as Muslim. which is a whole nother.
It's like about
thing.
last time I checked the Pew Research, it's about 2% that
Which is also higher than the national average, isn't it?
Yeah. But and like 0.5% identifies atheist, but I think that we're
Openly,
making openly as atheist, but I think that we're making a little progress only because we do see a rise in the nons. Right. I think that we're right at around 18%. And that's actually higher than it was like in a few years ago when they did the same research. So I am of the mind, I always try to be hopeful because I can't do my job if I'm not. That, the more that there are going to be Black atheists specifically that actually are very much so open about their non-belief, and they are willing to talk with others about it. And also we're not scary. We're not boiling babies on the weekends and eating them with a nice Chianti and fava beans. That's not happening, and also that, and another thing that, especially since, all of us have identified as secular humanists, we happen to do good in our community just because we want to, and because we want to see the upliftment of our community. I mean, like I've since I've been atheist, I have fed homeless people. I've given away clothes. I worked at food pantries, and I'm not doing this to toot my own horn, like say how good Cynthia is. No, it's because I really truly desire helping people, and I think that once that some of the other ones, especially who identify as Christian, see that you can still do good for others and not necessarily believe in a God, they just might start to examine their reasons, or even if they have a good reason to believe.
Cynthia, you are going to have a lot of fans. Actually, I think all of you are after this stream. Where can they get to know you better? Where can we find you? And we will make sure to put those links in the stream as well. But I know you have a link tree, don't you?
Mm-hmm.
So is everything on the link tree?
It is. So and I'll just give like an overview. So I am a regular on the Nonprofits, which is an ACA produced show that comes on Sundays at 3 Central Time. So I'm a regular host there. I also will be coming back hopefully very soon with my own show called The 13%, which specifically deals with issues, sociopolitical issues that from the group of folk that come from chattel slavery in America that I actually host with my lovely partner, Arthur. And thank you, Nate. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Appreciate it so much. And I'll also do another show called The Chronicles of a Revolutionary Nerd, which is a podcast video YouTube thingy that I do with another friend of mine who is a comic book creator and owns Urban Style Comics. And we talk about movies, pop culture, comics, sci-fi, all
of my favorites.
Yes, from a blurred point of view, because I am about that life, and I wish I could show you all my other background. But if you check out the Nonprofits, especially on the weeks that I've been on there, you will see a certain vehicle that is what is it? Time and shit. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna get my Hoovian card revoked, y'all. That's terrible. I've been a Hoovian like all my damn life, but I have a background of the TARDIS. That oftentimes when we do the Nonprofits, because I'm also about that Hoovian life. Shout out to Tom Baker. So that's how you find me. Check out my link tree. All my links are there.
Well, from one sci-fi fan to another, may the 4th be with you.
May the 4th and also with you.
Mike Carey, you are taking a sip of a drink right now, but when you're not taking sips of drinks, you are planning future projects. And so you may not want to talk about it yet because it's still in the planning stages, but can we expect to see you maybe on any kind of live streaming thingy? Maybe?
Yeah, I'm trying to. So first, we have, or I have at this point, youtube.com/the one good reason. It's the number one. I don't know if your audience may remember, I had a Facebook page where we were doing, epistemology-esque conversations about different topics like love or consciousness, authority and subordinates, and other boring conversations along those lines. Everything kind of got destroyed. There was some kind of a hacking or something that happened back in November. And this is actually the first time I've done a live in many months. So this was such an enticing topic. I wanted to come on and show support. But yeah, as far as the regular
thank you, Secular Rarity, for the $5 as well.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, for sure. No, for sure. Give it up. I'm definitely in a rebuilding phase. I do want to get things up and running again. Just have, a lot of things in the background going on. I may be able to get Xavier Hayes. I don't know if you remember him, Xavier Hayes, to help out with a couple of shows. He was somebody who was, for anyone that doesn't know, he was somebody who was religious and went through a suicidal period. And actually let go of the religion and decided that, he's actually worth a damn, and became an atheist. He calls himself a gaytheist. And we have an interview. I actually did an interview with him, which is on the page if anyone's interested. But yeah, I'm planning on doing more lives. Probably going to drop Distant Minds 3, episode 3, which is basically talking about humanism versus extraterrestrials and whether or not that would be racist at that point. I'll go ahead and drop it there before I ramble on.
Do me a favor before you get too YouTube famous. Just make a deal that you'll come on my show again at least one more time.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, and John Gray, you told me before you didn't really have anything to plug, but you got some fans tonight. I'm a huge fan of yours, and I would love to have you back on my show.
Yeah, definitely.
We will keep in touch. We keep in touch semi-regularly anyway.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I've always wanted to do something like this. I probably have just, I probably could, like you guys, probably have something where I did something similar, but I'm just like scratching the surface of talking to other people about this kind of thing. So this was new for me, but it was very, very fun. So I look forward to, having more discussions like this with more smart people. It was fun.
Oh. And I wanted to do this because I had never done it before. You guys had indicated to me that you hadn't really done it. At least two of you have. I think it's something that needs to be seen. I think there is something to what you said, John, about how there are a lot of people in the community that are like us, but too scared to either admit it to themselves or to their family or to explore it further. And then so they just continue to be one of those people that marks Christian among the 79% or whatever it was. So hopefully this is a start of getting people to not necessarily just deconvert, but read your Bible if you're a Christian. And if you're a Black Christian, read the scary parts that they don't want you to read or that you think are too scary to read, and then ask the right questions. And that's all I can ask you to do. But
I have a question for you, Bryce.
Oh, sure.
Sorry, it's just a burning question.
Yes.
The video store situation. Did you have to go in there with a black light?
I did not. I don't know what the owner did.
I have to know. Is it? How did you get in there?
Yeah, no, it was. I didn't do any of that stuff.
I tried to ask you with a straight face.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I didn't have to clean. I had a vacuum in there, but that was it. And I didn't want to touch the things in there. I was really young at the time. I was like 18 or 19. This was one of my first jobs. And this is back in my Christian days when I wasn't supposed to be looking at that stuff anyway. And so I looked, but I felt bad about looking.
To piggyback on Mike's question, did you often, when you had to clean in there, clutch your imaginary Christian pearls?
Yes, but mostly for myself, because when I would be like looking and intrigued by some of this stuff and thinking about how I could possibly like Well, I can't rent it myself, so do I like steal it and sneak it out and then watch it, or
no, you just hang out with the pastor.
What is am I going to go to
Pastor, hold on. Hey,
Yeah,
you need a ride?
Yeah,
it's on me.
But,
oh no,
no. Those
do you
days,
use Lyft, or what do you do?
Yeah, I didn't think to even. I forget about stories like that until something triggers them, and I have to recall back to those. Yeah, you're really making me think back to that experience now. Anywho, if you guys have enjoyed this show, please like and consider subscribing. Don't consider, just subscribe. If you like this show, you're gonna like future shows, and you're gonna like the other shows on Tang. So subscribe to that TART Tang content for more. And for Wes and Skids the Clown, this is Bryce Aroni asking you to have your gods spayed or neutered.